So I was speaking with... I had a back and forth on Twitter briefly with the gentleman who runs Uncharted X. This is a fantastic channel of a guy who really does really excellent legwork, going to Egypt and lets you see this fantastic architecture. And on top of it, there's some people who do great analysis. There's some people who do interesting exploration. This guy tends to do both at the same time, which is valuable and fascinating. So he and I both discovered a video that I think was trending, must have been trending lately. A bunch of people have been watching it. It's called The Last Druid. And apparently, in the previous video, I talked about the old ancient traditions of Egypt, which had really the ring of truth to them. Apparently, something similar was happening in Ireland, which is not at all surprising, because why do you think all those monks were so motivated to copy ancient texts in the year 700? Well, because they were predisposed to by their old ancient culture, which knew that old knowledge was valuable and that they needed to carry this on and preserve it for future generations. So apparently, what this old man says, and there's a link below if you'd like to see it, it's a documentary that looks like it's from the 90s. And so he says, and I have every reason to believe it, he says he's part of a very old oral tradition that goes back thousands of years, about people who wanted to preserve the knowledge of mankind and ensure and be separate enough from the culture so that they could preserve their traditions, but connected enough to the cultures so they could make sure that people remembered. And so they would go, they went all around Europe and the Near East, people in this tradition just continually reminding people of important wisdom. I thought, oh, that's fantastic. So he says as far as he knew, just because the world had changed so much, as far as he knew, he was the last person who was part of that. And what the gentleman from Uncharted X and myself, when our collective jaws hit the floor, this is from the 90s, when this stuff about the Younger Dryas and the end of the Ice Age 10,000 years ago was not widely known at all. Some of it was not discovered by science yet. And so the interviewer asked him, so how long does this go back? And he says, oh, very long, very long. It goes back to the last cataclysm, when there were the meteors and the lightning strikes. The meteors and the lightning strikes. Okay, those are the two most favorable current cutting-edge controversial hypotheses for how the last ice age ended. People believe that it was a coronal mass ejection from the sun, which would have created lightning storms, adding heat to the atmosphere, and a similar thing happening with a with a comet or a meteor hitting. And here's this old man in Ireland who's saying, "Oh yes, it is back when this happened. Back when this happened, people realized that knowledge needed to be preserved, and so they started this 10,000-year tradition, which apparently he was part of." So it's astounding. This does put us in the position of saying, well, so what do we do with all of this? Do we try to start new traditions? Do we try to look to the past? It's been so important, and there has been this system, which is now not functioning the way it used to, about an old order of the preservation of wisdom. And he said, well, I have a very, he said, I have a very strong feeling that there must be a new order of the world beginning now. The interesting thing is that he seemed to be rather, not exactly resigned, but he seemed to be very much at peace. It would seem like it would be a very sad thing that this great tradition is dying. He seemed to be at peace with it, and I think part of that was that he reasoned that the world is different enough now that it's appropriate to have a different way of doing things so that there would be new understandings emerging. Things that would not neglect the old wisdom, but things that would be done in an extremely different way because of how much the world is different. I think we can agree. We can agree that the position of humans in the world is very different. And I mentioned something. I promised to make a video, and this is that video, about the understanding of a new order. And what I had mentioned on Twitter is that there is a book called The Nature of Order. This is book 1 of the 4 volumes of The Nature of Order, written by Christopher Alexander, a man with whom I have had the great honor and pleasure to have worked with on various things. I wrote my thesis on his ideas. He did me the great honor of reading my thesis and then discussed it with me. That's a whole other thing that we can get into. So yes, this is, I think, a very important book, The Nature of Order, an essay on the art of building and the nature of the universe. Of course, the art of building is something that we do with this channel, and what this channel is all about. If you want to support these two things, we do these things simultaneously. We pursue the perfectibility, the improvement of the art of building, as well as understanding our place in the universe, because I certainly believe the two are connected. Chris thought so as well. And the beginning of this, there are 4 volumes here. The Phenomenon of Life, The Process of Creating Life, The Vision of a Living World, number 3, which has a lot of interesting zoning codes. It's not an oxymoron. And book 4, which is The Luminous Ground, which is the metaphysics. He was very Aristotelian. He had the physics, and after the physics, metaphysics, in the way he organized his knowledge here. He's as exhaustive as Aristotle as well. This is very, it's easy to read, but it's really detailed. But it's fantastic. Each chapter does stand alone, and the beginning of this talks about the art of building, the nature of the universe. It talks about what order is, order as mechanism, talking about Descartes, and then the destructive impact that view of the world has had, and then a new vision of architecture. And the idea here that he starts with, so many people skip over this. What he starts with is the necessity of moving beyond our current view of the world, beyond our current worldview, which was, our current worldview predates Descartes. I believe that it goes back to the building of the Gothic cathedrals around the year 1000. If you follow Spengler's historiography, this is the beginning of the Faustian world system, when what we call the West actually became distinct. It was, before that, it was a bunch of tribes in the forests of France and Germany and northern Italy who were trying to imitate the Romans. And yes, they started to have something distinct and powerful for both good and bad. You know, this is the time when the Crusades happened. This is also the time of the building of the great cathedrals. This is the beginning of Western European philosophy. Bernard of Clairvaux, eventually, not far after that, Aquinas. That's the period of Western history when things were instinctively new. Descartes came at a time when what was previously instinct got formalized into system. We are now living at a time when these ideas have run their course. This was really the theme of the early 20th century. This is expressed in art, in modernist painting. Dada spoke of this very eloquently. If you want to see it done more politely than Dada, you can read T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. You know, we are the hollow men, heads filled with straw, alas. And there is a sense that things were worn out. There was also, if you look at certain things, a sense that something new is starting. I think Kazimir Malevich, as an artist, is central to this. And the beginning of understanding this, in I think what is a fascinating way, can be seen. Spengler touches upon it, but he was coming so early. It's like observing the movement of the planets before you've ever seen an eclipse, and then you describe what an eclipse should look like. That's kind of what Spengler was doing. But he had not yet seen the eclipse, but he was trying to describe what it would look like. Now we're starting to see the eclipse and starting to see the diamond ring corona coming on the other side. At least I hope so. But the whole idea, to get specifically back to what Chris was writing about, the mechanistic worldview is the idea of world as created object. It's like, and you think, well, of course it is. Of course the world is an object that somehow got created. Whether you think it's by God or whether you think it's by evolution or a combination of the two or the Big Bang, that's how we think in the West. And we just think that that's normal because these are such fundamental beliefs. And Alan Watts particularly has a fantastic lecture on this called Image of Man. There are actually other ways of looking at the world. The Hindus have a way of looking at it where the world is the dream of God, that we are all God dreaming right now. We're all in each other's dream. That's a fantastically beautiful way of looking at it, and that does fundamentally change how people in the subcontinent look at things a little bit. People in China and Japan have yet a different worldview again. They have what a kind of sui generis model, a Taoist model of the world as emergent order. Part and parcel with that is something that I think what Chris writes about. He owes a lot philosophically and acknowledges it to Eastern philosophy, especially if you read his book, The Timeless Way of Building. Fantastic book. Really lays the groundwork for the philosophy in this. It's also shorter and easier to read. It was designed to be short and easy to read. The Timeless Way of Building. It's wonderful. It's a very, very Taoist book. Down to the iconography. It was inspired by the 12 Bulls series. So the Taoist way sees the world as a naturally emergent order in which everything has life. Air has life to it. Rocks have life. There's qi and li. Qi, energy. Energy in the sense of life, but life that permeates everything. And li is order. So as you bring li to the qi, you have a type of complexity, and the more involved that gets, the more complex your life, the life before you is. For example, someone from China or Japan, if you talk about the ideas within this book, that this book redefines what we think of as life, the idea that architecture itself can have a life, a building can have a life. And by the way, this is what the medieval stonemasons that built the cathedrals thought. They thought the stone was alive. If you made a mistake, you would be whipped, because they were very serious craftspeople back then. One of the reasons you would be so severely punished is that you killed the stone. The stone was beginning to live. You were helping the stone kind of give birth to itself. And then if you broke it accidentally, they would bury the stone because they considered it a dead body. And so at the early part of the Faustian world system, you still had this influence from the other world systems where they believed that that life permeated everything. As things became hyper-rationalized, this became broken down, where not only did we question that life in the sense of soul, spirit, or energy permeated everything in a kind of pantheism, we began to even doubt, going down to someone like B.F. Skinner, we began to even doubt that there was a kind of a spiritual life within ourselves. We began to understand ourselves as machines, as something automatic, created. A lot of people got anxious about free will versus determinism, which on many levels is a ridiculous debate. But I think you would only be worried about this if you would believe that things could be deterministic and at the same time not believe that this determinism was done by a benevolent force. So if you do not believe in a benevolent creator, or you have doubts about a benevolent creator, and you believe that determinism is possible, only then are you anxious about it. So that was a very diagnostic anxiety of the late Faustian world system of our Western culture. And Chris's argument, which I can get into more detail later, is that it is truly impossible, and this is why this should never be skipped over, ever, It is truly impossible to take architecture where it needs to go beyond the limits that we have now. Now, you can take architecture into a realm of art, into a realm of kind of expressionism that can make some improvements over the kind of harsh modernism that we have, but to really make it sing, you need to re-examine how you look at the world, re-examine how your clients look at the world, how your clients look at the houses, and say, okay, obviously, when you go into a place that is truly wonderful, don't you feel different? Don't you feel that the order of this building is somehow a system of rich spiritual complexity that then contributes to your own spiritual complexity, and that you feel elevated, you feel different, you feel connected somehow, or perhaps you just even feel wonderfully at peace. This type of thing doesn't need to be fancy. It can happen in a mechanic's garage when everything is just where it needs to be. And there's a sense that, yes, this is a place that's vibrant. And I think we all have experienced that on some level or another, even though we tend to live in spaces that are not as good as they could be. But the step to taking it better begins with changing how we look at the world and seeing that our sense of self is not the idea of a little human inside our heads that observes what we see, the sign of strict dualism between mind and body, and that outside is stupid and random, and inside we hope, we're anxious, that we hope it's smart. Now, there's an intelligence, there's an order that permeates everything. There's life that permeates everything and all objects, and when things are particularly attuned to the healthy maintenance, the healthy support, the growth, the cherishing, the celebration of that life that is within us and in the environment that we interact with, because each defines and influences the other. When we start from that point, that is how architecture is truly improved. Everything else in these 4 volumes, everything else that we try to do turns upon that fulcrum, that basic and very, very simple observation. But it's difficult to act upon because a lot of things need to change in order for that to be truly pursued. But that is what we are doing. That is why we are thankful for your support. You can click on the link below if you want to participate in helping, in learning more about this and to making the world more attuned to the nature of order, to this new worldview. I welcome any comments, any discussion. This is fertile ground for input from anybody. And so thank you very much. Thank you, Uncharted X, for prompting this. I wouldn't have made this video the way it is without you mentioning that point about the old man from Ireland talking about the new order of things. But when I saw that, that moment spoke to me as well. I feel that we do have a responsibility, but it's a joyous responsibility. We live in challenging times. We live, as the old Chinese curse said, interesting times, but I would not choose to be alive at any other time in history. We have wonderful things that we can give to our grandchildren and our descendants. And it begins with diligently working upon our understanding and how we appropriately act with that in mind. Thanks for watching.